Welcome to the lecture summary video for the lectures of Operations Management, Business Strategy, and Customer Orientation will be the topic for today. This lecture summary video will be covering the lecture 1 and 2 for the weeks 1 and 2 respectively for cohort 10 semester 2. My name is Hajirah and I will be summarizing the lectures for you for the first and the second week of cohort 10 semester 2. So we started off this lecture by discussing about the course book and structure, and the first topic or the first chapter that we will be discussing would be the business strategy and customer orientation that is indicated by the red color in the first circle. So the learning outcomes for this lecture would be the first learning outcome, which is to assess the role of operations management in the modern customer and business environment. The learning objectives would be to define what is meant by strategy and strategic management, effectively use key strategic terms, describe the difference between market-based and resource-based approaches to strategy, discuss the nature of organizational competencies and capabilities, and then explaining the nature of competitive advantage. So we started off by the definition of strategy, which is that the direction and the scope of an organization over the long term, which achieves advantage in a changing environment through its configuration of resources and competencies with the aim of fulfilling stakeholder expectations, as set by Johnson and everyone else in 2005. Then we discussed a few decision-making aims. Then we also discussed this little diagram, which is like the simplest form of business strategy, which discusses what the customers want, who our customer groups are, and how can we satisfy our customers. Then we discussed about the market positioning and the unique selling point. Then we also discussed about strategic decision making, which involves time horizon, scale of consequence, scope of activity, level of complexity, and level of certainty. Then we moved on to discuss the strategy seeks to secure competitive advantage. So we discussed about what is competitive advantage, which is that it is something that sets a firm apart or makes it different from its rivals. Then we discussed briefly the analysis of the competitive environment forces, which are the Porter's 5 forces model. Then we went on to a little class activity, and then we moved to the topic of packaging a strategy. So we discussed that while making a strategy, we should be defining our mission statement, our corporate vision, our values of the organization, the strategic objectives, strategic plans, and strategic priorities. Then we moved on to the different organizational levels like corporate, business, and operational levels, and which kind of questions does each level answer at their own state or again the level. And then what is the purpose of each level? And then what are the concerns that each of these levels, corporate, business, and operational levels, deal with? Then we went on to discuss the strategic approach, like how is the strategy approached? So we discussed that there are overall 2 approaches to strategy. The first one is the external market-based view, and then the internal resource-based view. So the external market-based view, as discussed by Porter in 1980, is the view that encourages understanding of all aspects of the external or market environment. And then the internal resource-based view, it's also called the resource-based theory. It basically concentrates on the firm's capability and how it can be configured and used to achieve success. Then we discussed briefly about the pestle analysis, which includes the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors, which are the external factors influencing or affecting, impacting an organization. Then we discussed about the customer value proposition, the goals and purposes that the organization wants to meet, that the product or service may help with, the desired consequences in use situation that will have an impact on goal achievement, and the desired product and service attributes that will contribute to the desired consequence. Then we discussed about some of the customer value elements like the functional, social, emotional, epistemic, and conditional elements. along with some examples and definitions, as you can see here. Then we discussed about the organizational resource types, that there are different types of resource categories like physical, human, and organizational, which can be divided between a gradient of tangible and intangible resources. Then we discussed about resources and competitive advantage, and we discussed the VRIN model by Barney, which includes the fact that in order to be competitive, or in order for a company to have competitive advantage, the resources of the company should be valuable, rare, imperfectly imitable, and non-substitutable. Then we discussed further about the VRIN model, and then we discussed some sustainable competitive advantage, the how can we attain or achieve competitive advantage in our organization that is sustainable and long term. Then we discussed about competencies, that some resources may create a competitive advantage on their own, such as unique supply of raw material like water in the whiskey industry, or a piece of intellectual property like a formula for a drug. It is more useful to think of resources in combination. Resources working together create a more powerful force, which lead to a better competitive advantage. Then we discussed the different types of competence. So there's threshold competence, there's core competence, and then there is distinctive competence. Then we discussed each of these in a little bit more detail. So the threshold competence is the basic level of competency that allows the firm to simply exist and operate. The core competency is at the next level, and it is the kind of competency that provides open access to variety of markets, contributes significantly to the performance, and it is a little difficult to imitate as well. Then the distinctive competence is the highest kind of competence, where the entire VRIN model is applied to the resources of the company, and it is the competence that is distinctive because it is not imitable at all by anybody else in the market. Then we discussed about the competencies in service provision. Then we discussed about customer orientation. And moving on, we also discussed dynamic capabilities of a firm. And then we discussed the summary of the whole lecture. Moving on from here, we went on to discuss we will go on to discuss the week two's lecture 2, about operation strategy and customer slash business context. So the purpose of this chapter is to pick up where the corporate strategy ends and investigate how the operational systems and processes are conceived that will support the company in reaching its strategic goals. So the learning outcomes for this chapter would be to define the term operation strategy, develop an operation strategy using the model provided, explain the concept of trade-offs in operations management, explain how the product lifecycle might inform operation strategy, and discuss the utility of generic operation strategy. So as per the book structure, this is the chapter 2, operation strategy. So the aim of, so we discussed the basics of the strategy, like what is strategy, and we discussed that the aim of strategy is to guide an organization throughout its lifetime by defining its scope of activity and configuring its resources to carry out this scope of activity. Strategy is about asking questions like who the customers are, what the customers want, and how your organization can deliver a product or a service that will meet and satisfy what the customers want. So operation strategy is the set of major decisions about core competencies, capabilities, processes, technologies, resources, and tactical activities necessary in the function or chain of functions that create and deliver product and service contribution. Then we went on to discuss the role of operation strategy, like higher level corporate strategy. Operation strategy is also about decision making, as discussed by Slack and Louise in 2002. It is defined as the pattern of decisions that shape the long-term capabilities of an operation and their contribution to an overall strategy. Simply speaking, for example, there's a body of soldiers that sits far from home, outgunned and completely surrounded by the enemy. The general sits at the entrance to his tent for some considerable time, staring into the blue sky. Eventually, he summons the colonel and orders him to get the troops back to the base. The colonel then asks the general that, can you please suggest me how can I get the troops back to the base? So the general replies that it is your responsibility. I decide the strategy and you implement it. So basically, this example simply means that the organization as a whole, or the senior management of the organization, will give you a task to complete. Now, how you're going to complete it, what strategy you're going to use exactly, that will be decided by you based on the goal or the target that you have to achieve. And then we moved on to discuss the purpose of strategy, of operation strategy particularly. So it is to contribute directly to the strategic objectives of the next level up in the hierarchy, and to help other parts of the business to make their own contribution to the strategy. Then we discussed this contribution of operations. This is a kind of a graph which is divided into 4 stages, where in the stage 1 we are more like internally neutral, and we're just kind of surviving, correcting the worst problems of the operational problems in the organization that we have. Then we become externally neutral in the stage 2, and we try to adopt the best practices. And then in stage 3 we are further improving in our performance and contribution. So we link the strategy with operations, and we become more internally supportive. And as we become uh, more operationally capable and more, we have more strategic impact, we move on to the stage 4, where we provide a competitive advantage, and we become externally supportive as well as internally supportive. So then we discussed, or we discussed each of these stages, as you can see here, in further detail, and you can read this for further information along with a little more guidance. So each of these stages in that from that diagram is discussed here. Then we went on to discuss how is operation strategy generated. So we discussed it from different points of view, from the corporate, customer, performance, process, and infrastructure point of view. And then we discussed each of these point of views or stages in further detail as well. So in the corporate view, there's operational vision, operational objectives, operational plans, and operational priorities. The step 2 was the customer view, where the price, functionality, performance, variety, and quality is taken care of or considered. Then the performance view, where the tangibility and intangibility of goods is considered. And then also the cost and the functionality is considered. The variety, and customization as well as quality is also considered in the tangible performance measures. In the intangible performance measures, the reliability and responsiveness, assurance, empathy is considered. Then step 4 is the process view, where we ask different questions like, how is the conversion actually carried out? What were the basic operations principles of the system? What are the limits of the systems? How is the system organized, and so on? Then the infrastructure view, there can be different. The decision making here should be taken in different areas like management structure, management system, job design, enterprise control system, automation, and the shape of the supply chain. Then we talked about different trade-offs. So basically, in operations system, there are some possible trade-offs like low price against available variety, speed against flexibility, personalized attention against volume of customers. Then we discussed the product life cycle model. So every product that comes into being goes through a life cycle, where first it is born, that's the birth phase, then it's in the growth phase, then it matures, and then ultimately it starts to decline, and then it's completely withdrawn from the market over time. Then we also discussed about how can operation strategy be simplified. So we discussed the Porter's generic strategies of differentiation, overall cost leadership, and focus. And then we also discussed some value propositions like product leadership, operational excellence, and customer intimacy. And then that's it. That was the summary. That is a summary of the lecture number 2 for cohort 10 semester 2. And if you need any more guidance or help, of course, you can look into the slides that are available to you on Moodle, and you can read through them for further information and detail. Thank you so very much for watching the video. I hope that it helped. See you in the next video. Bye.